So you're thinking about switching your dog from a standard American dog diet or SAD diet to an all-meat carnivore diet, but you're still not exactly sure if it's right for your dog. So in this video, I'm going to talk about all the different types of standard American dog diets and discuss why those diets may not be optimal for your dog. And hopefully by the end of this video, you'll have the confidence you need to make the switch. So my name is Jacob, and I started me and my dog on a carnivore diet 5.5 years ago, and it has had profound benefits on both my health and the health of my dog. Now for me personally, I came from a place of being extremely ill. I was actually on the brink of death, and carnivore saved my life. And I couldn't see myself switching my diet to a carnivore diet and improving my health and not doing the same for my dog, because at the time I was feeding my dog hyper-processed kibble. And I know a lot of people out there can probably relate to that because that is the most common diet on the market today for dogs. So we'll start with that one. We'll start with the standard American dog diet, or the SAD diet, which is very akin to the SAD diet for humans. So in the SAD diet, you have a couple different variations. There's kibble, there's dry food, there's wet food, or food that comes in a can, comes in a bag. And of those, there's a vegan vegetarian version, there's meat with grain, and then meat grain free. So let's start with the vegan vegetarian diet. As far as diets go for your dog, this is absolutely the worst diet that you could ever feed your dog. There's actually been cases, specifically overseas, I think in Australia, where a couple fed their dog a vegan diet, and it essentially killed the dog, and they were charged for animal abuse. The dog was not properly nourished, it became severely underweight, and despite the dog basically crying out for help, visibly, they continued to feed the dog the vegan diet. The nutrients that are in these foods are not in the optimal form for your dog to be able to utilize and absorb. So a lot of that is going to get passed right through the dog and be expelled out without even being utilized. And this is the reason why dogs on vegan and vegetarian diets usually wind up with nutritional deficiencies. They end up extremely underweight, and in some cases, it even leads to death for these dogs. The problem with vegan and vegetarian diets for dogs is that dogs are not designed to consume those types of food in mass. They have sharp pointy teeth. They do not have orbital jaws. Their stomach pH is very, very low, which means their stomach acid is very acidic. Dogs have forward-facing eyes, pointy ears that move around for a reason. They have a very strong nose for a reason. They are meant to hunt, kill, and consume prey. So when we're talking about dry versus wet, there's really not much difference in terms of nutrition. It's basically the same exact food. You just have one that's in kibble form and then one that's in wet form, which usually comes in the form of like a can or comes in a bag or something like that. So another version of the standard American dog diet, which is the most common one out there, is a standard kibble diet. So that usually means grains and meat. Now almost all kibble that's sold on grocery store shelves is made by the same food manufacturers that make hyper-processed food for us, which means the ingredients they put in this kibble is extremely low quality. This is not things that you want to be feeding your dog. They're full of artificial additives, preservatives, synthetic vitamins and minerals, artificial colors, and a lot of really, really bad stuff that is linked to neurological disorders, cancers, metabolic disease, weight gain, obesity, hormone disruption, diabetes, and pretty much all the things dogs are suffering from in the current age. Now, some of these kibble brands are better than others. Some are actually full of quite a bit of meat, but the meat they use in this kibble, even if it's a premium brand, is going to be the lowest quality meat they could possibly shove in this food. We're talking meat from like diseased animals. There's actually been cases of dogs dying because there was meat in the kibble that had euthanasia drugs in there, which is the drugs they use to put down animals. So in other words, they're putting down animals, and instead of burying or incinerating the animal, they put it in dog food. And to sanitize this meat, they put it in basically an inferno and superheat it. So there's basically no nutritional value left in the meat anyway by the time it gets in the kibble. And most of this kibble is full of hyper-processed grains. And hyper-processed grains are also going to be the lowest quality grains they could possibly shove in the food. So these grains are going to be, like I said, hyper-processed, which means that their glycemic index is going to be very, very high. It's going to lead to blood sugar spikes and falls in the dog, insulin responses, which leads to metabolic disease, things like diabetes, obesity, weight gain, all the really bad stuff. Again, you don't want your dog to suffer from. The grains are also going to be sprayed, just like the ones in our food, with pesticides, herbicides, and antibiologics. Think atrazine, think glyphosate. All these things are linked to cancers. All these things are linked to hormone disruption, metabolic disease. Again, really, really bad stuff. And then on top of that, all those grains are also grown in depleted soil, which is sprayed and doused with synthetic fertilizers. And synthetic fertilizers are notoriously full of PFAs and heavy metals. And again, these are things that you do not want your dog to consume, especially not for every single meal for their entire life. Because what happens is all of these things in these dog foods are bioaccumulative. They build up in your dog's body over time. Your dog cannot excrete them, especially at the rate they're being consumed. And it is a house of cards that eventually falls. And we're seeing that it's cutting dogs' lifespans in half. Dogs that are supposed to live 16 to 20 years are now living 6 to 8, maybe 10 years at the most. This is not a good scenario for our dogs. And the third most common variation of the standard American dog diet foods are grain-free. And grain-free sounds very promising because a lot of people are catching on to the idea that grains probably aren't the best for our dogs. Grains are not something our dogs would ever consume in the wild under any circumstance unless they killed prey and there was some sort of grain in the stomach, in which case it's going to pass right through the dog and not be digested at all. But people hear that and they're like, okay, this is good. My dog's not getting grains, but they substitute the grains with legumes and other plant products. Legumes are linked to cardiomyopathy in dogs, which is a critical heart condition and can lead to death in dogs. Pea protein and protein from legumes is not something your dog can readily convert and use. It's just like most of the other plant products in dog food. They are not in very bioavailable forms, so those things are going to go in your dog. They're in a very, very poor quality already. They're again inundated with all these really bad things, so they're going to cause low-grade inflammation. Again, over a long period of time, that's going to build up. It's going to cause really bad things for your dog, probably cancer and weight gain and things like that. Your dog's not going to be able to absorb and extract really any nutrients from any of these products. So the chances of your dog being malnourished or not properly nourished, or at least deficient in some vitamins, minerals, and nutrients is going to be pretty high. So when it comes to the standard American dog diet, kibble, whether it be wet or dry, these are the foods that are going to be at the very, very low end of the spectrum and the ones that you would want to avoid at all costs. And if you're watching this video, you're probably watching it because you're trying to get away from those anyway. So hopefully this just adds a little bit more fuel to your fire and pushes you in the direction to do that. So another very common variation of the standard American dog diet, and this one's getting a little bit better, is the standard American dog diet mixed with cooked or raw food. So mixed with actual meat. And this is actually a very common one that I actually recommend. When you're transitioning your dog from kibble to carnivore, I recommend adding a small amount of meat into their kibble, a little bit at a time, over the course of about 30 days or so, to help transition your dog, so that it's not such an abrupt kibble to carnivore jump. Because when that happens, you can run into unwanted side effects, things like loose and runny stools, digestive problems, the dog not feeling very well, not doing very well, and just a really rocky process of trying to transition your dog. So this can be very good for that. And if you're on a tight budget and you can't really afford buying nothing but meat for your dog, and you want to substitute some of the kibble for meat, this would be a pretty good option to do that if this is your only option. And like I said, if you're transitioning your dog, this is also a very good tool, but is not something that should be relied on long term. The ultimate goal should be getting your dog away from kibble 100%. So in terms of standard American diet for your dog, this is the best one out of all of them, but it's still not going to be optimal because you still have those plant foods in there. You still have nuts, seeds, grains, vegetables, legumes, all these really bad things, all the really bad ingredients. So it's still going to be causing some form of low-grade inflammation, but it's definitely going to be better than feeding your dog straight kibble for every single meal. So if you're ready to make the switch to an all-meat carnivore diet, but you're not exactly sure which version to choose, click on this video right here where I explain each one and help you determine which species appropriate diet is going to be optimal for your dog.